Eli Turner had always loved the quiet of the woods. Since he was a boy, he found peace under the tall trees and beside the gentle streams. Now, in his early 40s, Eli still felt that same calm whenever he walked into the forest. The woods were his escape from the busy world. They were where he felt free, where he could think clearly. Eli lived in a small mountain town in the Pacific Northwest. After leaving the army, he wanted a new life far from the noise of the city. He found a small cabin near the forest, a place where he could be close to nature every day. The house was simple, but it was his home. Eli was a hunter, but not the kind who hunted just for sport. Hunting for him was about respect. It was about knowing the land and living with the rhythm of the seasons. He always followed the rules and only took what he needed. He wanted to protect the forest, not harm it. He saw himself as a guardian, not a destroyer. But when Eli moved into the neighborhood, he quickly realized not everyone saw him the same way. The town was full of families and hikers. Many people came to the woods for fun and exercise. They liked to walk the trails, take pictures of birds, and enjoy the fresh air. The neighborhood was peaceful, but it had rules made by the Homeowners Association, or HOA. The HOA was a group of people who managed the neighborhood and made sure everyone followed their rules. At first, Eli tried to keep to himself. He didn't want trouble. He hunted quietly early in the morning and late in the afternoon. He never made loud noises or left trash behind. But soon, the HOA began to notice him. One morning, Eli found a letter on his doorstep. It said he was fined for unauthorized hunting. He was shocked. The land where he hunted was not owned by the HOA, it belonged to a family who lived far away and had allowed people to hike there for years. Eli checked the local laws carefully and knew he was following all the rules. Still, the HOA didn't stop. More letters came, each with bigger fines. They said Eli was making neighbors uncomfortable and threatening the peace. Eli felt confused and hurt. He had moved to this town to live peacefully. Instead, he felt watched and judged. One evening, Eli decided to go to the HOA meeting. He wanted to explain himself. Maybe if he talked to them, they would understand. He dressed in his best clothes and walked to the community hall. The room was full of people who already seemed to have made up their minds about him. When Eli spoke, his voice was calm but firm. He explained how he hunted respectfully, how the land was not private to the HOA, and how he only hunted when it was allowed by law. He asked them to stop the fines. But the HOA board did not listen. One woman, the board president, looked at him with cold eyes. She said, "This neighborhood has a culture, and hunting is not part of it. We want everyone to feel safe." Eli tried to explain again, but it was clear they were not interested. The meeting ended, and he left feeling small and angry. How could they say he was not welcome? How could they treat him like a problem? Back at home, Eli sat on his porch and looked at the woods. The trees stood tall and strong, but Eli felt like he was being pushed out. The forest that once gave him peace now felt like a place of conflict. He thought about the people in the town. Many of them hiked the trails on that same land. They loved the forest, but they didn't know the full story. They didn't see the letters, the fines, or the cold looks. To them, Eli was just a man who wanted to hunt, like he had always done. Eli knew he could keep fighting the HOA. But he also knew it would be a long and painful battle. The HOA had power and money. They could keep fining him, making his life harder. Still, Eli wasn't someone who gave up easily. He had learned that in the army. He had faced hard situations before and found a way through. He would find a way to protect the land he loved and to stand up for himself. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees, Eli made a silent promise. He would not be pushed out. He would find a way to keep the woods safe for himself and for everyone who loved them. Eli Turner thought the letters from the HOA were a mistake at first. How could they fine him for hunting on land that wasn't theirs? He had followed every rule carefully. He hunted early in the morning, always wore bright orange for safety, and never left trash or disturbed the animals more than necessary. But the letters kept coming. Each one was more serious than the last. One day, Eli found a notice stuck to his front door. It said he was fined $500 for unauthorized hunting activities and warned that if he did not stop, they would take legal action. Eli was shocked. He had never faced anything like this before. The money was a lot for him. He worked as a mechanic in town and saved carefully for his little cabin and life in the woods. Paying these fines would make things very hard. He called the HOA office to ask for an explanation. The voice on the other end was cold and official. The woman told him they had received many complaints from neighbors who said they felt unsafe because of his hunting. Eli asked which neighbors and what exactly had happened, but she only repeated the same words: "The neighborhood wants peace and safety. Hunting is not allowed here." Eli tried to explain the land where he hunted was not part of the neighborhood. The trails and woods were owned by someone else, and hunting there was legal. But the woman would not listen. She said the HOA was acting to protect the whole community. Feeling frustrated, Eli decided to visit the landowners himself. Maybe they would help him. He drove a few hours to meet the family who owned the forest. They were surprised when he told them about the HOA's complaints and fines. "We didn't know about this," the landowner said. "We've always allowed people to use the land for hiking and sometimes hunting, as long as they followed the law. You should not be fined for that." They gave Eli the contact information for the company that managed the property and promised to speak to them. Back in town, Eli felt a small hope. Maybe if the landowners spoke up, the HOA would stop the fines. But he was wrong. The next HOA meeting was worse than the first. Eli went again, hoping to speak and clear things up. But the moment he entered the room, he felt the cold eyes of the board members. Some whispered quietly to each other. He realized many people were judging him before he said a word. When it was his turn, Eli spoke carefully. He explained again how the land was not theirs, how he hunted legally and respectfully, and how he wanted to live peacefully with his neighbors. The HOA president interrupted him. "We hear your words, Mr. Turner, but many residents are afraid. They don't want guns near their children or on their trails. You must understand our position." Eli looked around the room. He saw fear and suspicion on many faces. It was clear that his presence made some people uncomfortable not because of what he did, but because of who he was. He wanted to say more, to explain himself, but the meeting was controlled tightly. They voted again to keep fining him and said if he continued hunting, they would take the matter to court. Eli left the meeting feeling angry and hurt. It was not just about the hunting anymore, it was about respect, acceptance, and being treated fairly. He walked home slowly, thinking about what to do next. He knew fighting the HOA in court would be expensive and long. He did not want a fight like that. He only wanted to live his life in peace. But he also knew he couldn't just give up. He had spent years learning to stand firm in difficult situations. He thought about the forest, the animals, and the quiet trails he loved. He thought about the neighbors who loved to walk the paths, too, not knowing what was really going on. That night, Eli sat on his porch again, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind moved through the trees like a soft song, and the owls hooted gently in the distance. He made a decision: he would not let this unfairness continue. He would find a way to protect the land and himself. In the days that followed, Eli began to do research. He talked to local lawyers and other hunters in the area. He learned about land ownership, property rights, and how HOAs worked. He found stories about others who had faced similar problems and how they dealt with them. Eli also started talking to some of his neighbors one by one. Some were kind and listened to him with open minds. They said they didn't want trouble and wished the HOA would be more understanding. But others were afraid or angry. They believed the HOA's words without question. Eli realized the problem was bigger than just the fines, it was about trust and acceptance. Slowly, Eli began to see that this fight was not just about hunting. It was about his place in the community, about being seen and respected. Even though it was hard, Eli did not lose hope. He knew the forest was bigger than the small conflicts in town. He loved it too much to give up now. He would keep going, step by step, like he always had. Eli Turner tried to live quietly. He wanted no trouble with the HOA or his neighbors. But the letters and fines kept coming like a storm he could not escape. Every week, another paper demanding money or threatening legal action arrived in his mailbox. The stress weighed heavily on him. At first, Eli paid some of the smaller fines, hoping the matter would end. But the HOA was not satisfied. They kept sending bigger bills and harsher warnings. One day, he received a notice that they were suing him for not following the rules. The letter said he could face serious penalties and legal costs. Eli felt trapped. He could not understand how things had gotten so bad. He had done nothing wrong. He followed the hunting laws. The land he used was not owned by the HOA. Yet, they acted as if he was the enemy. He thought about going to court, but the thought scared him. Legal battles were expensive, long, and exhausting. He worked hard every day to support himself. Fighting the HOA would drain his savings and energy. One afternoon, after a long day at work, Eli sat on his porch feeling defeated. He looked out at the forest he loved so much. The trees stood tall and silent, as if watching him with quiet strength. Eli remembered how the woods had always been a place of peace for him. They had helped him heal after his time in the army. Now, the woods felt like a battlefield. His phone buzzed. It was a message from a neighbor, someone he had tried to be friendly with. The message was short and cold: "People are worried. They don't want hunters here. Maybe you should leave." Eli felt the sting of those words. He was being pushed out of a place he called home. But he was not going to run away. He decided to fight back, but carefully. Eli began gathering evidence. He took photos of the forest trails, of the land boundaries, and of the signs the HOA had posted. He kept copies of all the letters and fines they sent. He wrote down every conversation he had with the HOA and neighbors. He also reached out to a lawyer who helped people with property rights. The lawyer told Eli that the HOA had no right to fine him for hunting on land they did not own. But going to court would be a long process. Eli knew this. He was ready for the long fight. But he also thought about another way. One morning, Eli drove to the county office to check public records. He wanted to learn everything about the land near his home, the same land the HOA residents used for hiking and walking their dogs. He discovered something interesting: the forest was owned by a family who lived far away and rarely visited. They had recently put the land up for sale. No one in the neighborhood had told Eli about this. Eli's heart raced. If he could buy the land, he could protect it the way he wanted. He could stop the HOA from controlling it. He could keep hunting there peacefully and stop the conflict. It was a big risk. He did not have much money saved. But he also knew that sometimes, risks were necessary for peace and justice. Eli contacted a local real estate agent. He asked for information about the property and how to make an offer. He spent nights thinking, planning, and hoping. Meanwhile, the HOA continued to fine him. They sent another letter demanding a payment that Eli could not afford. The letter said if he did not pay, they would take his case to court and seek more penalties. Eli's friends and some neighbors warned him to give up. "It's not worth it," they said. "You'll lose everything." But Eli was determined. The forest was more than land, it was a part of him. It was where he found strength, calm, and purpose. He would not let fear or money stop him. Weeks passed. The day came when Eli made his offer on the land. It was a fair price, above market value, but fast and clean. He wanted the deal to close quickly. The owners accepted. Now, Eli owned the forest behind his home. Eli drove up to the land the next day. The forest looked the same, peaceful and green. But now, it was his. He walked the trails carefully, thinking about what to do next. The hikers and neighbors had always loved this land. But the HOA had tried to control it. Now, Eli had the power to decide its future. That evening, he sat on his porch again, feeling a mix of relief and responsibility. He knew this was not the end of the fight. The HOA might try to challenge him. The neighbors might be angry. But for the first time in months, Eli felt hope. He had taken control of his life and the land he loved. The forest was quiet. The future was uncertain. But Eli was ready. He would protect the woods. He would protect himself. And he would not be silenced. When Eli Turner signed the papers to buy the forest land, a new feeling filled his chest, a mix of pride, relief, and a heavy weight of responsibility. The forest, with its tall trees, soft moss, and winding trails, was now his to care for. He had never imagined that one day, he would own the land that had meant so much to him. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some people were shocked. Others whispered, curious and unsure what Eli would do next. He had not told many neighbors about the purchase yet. He wanted to take time to think and plan. Eli walked through the forest that evening, touching the rough bark of the trees and listening to the gentle sounds of birds and rustling leaves. This land was more than just a place to hunt, it was a piece of his heart. But owning the land also meant making hard choices. Eli knew that the neighborhood's hikers and families loved these woods. They walked the trails on weekends, took pictures of wildflowers, and brought their children to explore nature. He understood why people cared deeply about this place. Yet, Eli also remembered how the HOA had treated him, how they had fined him unfairly and made him feel like an outsider. They had acted as if the land belonged only to them, even though it did not. Now, Eli had the power to decide who could use the forest and how. The next day, he made a decision. He would close the forest trails to the public. It was a difficult choice, but Eli believed it was necessary. Closing the land would stop the HOA and others from misusing it or making false complaints. It would also give him peace, a chance to enjoy the woods without fear or judgment. He posted signs at every entrance to the forest. The signs read, "Private property, no trespassing. Forest closed permanently." The signs were simple, clear, and firm. Almost immediately, reactions came flooding in. At the next HOA meeting, the news became the main topic. The room buzzed with anger and confusion. "How can he do this?" one neighbor shouted. "We've used those trails for years." "This is unfair," said another. "The forest belongs to all of us." Eli attended the meeting but did not speak at first. He watched as neighbors argued and the board members tried to find answers. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but strong. "I bought this land legally," Eli said. "It is mine now. I have the right to decide how it is used." He explained why he closed the trails, that he had been treated unfairly, fined unjustly, and made to feel unwelcome. He told the room that he wanted peace and respect, not conflict. Some people nodded, understanding his pain. Others shook their heads, still angry. The HOA president looked at Eli and said, "You could have worked with us. You didn't have to shut the land." Eli replied, "I tried to talk to you. I tried to explain myself. But I was ignored. I was punished. This is my way to protect myself and the forest." The meeting ended with no agreement. The room was divided, and tension filled the air. In the days that followed, Eli heard stories from neighbors. Some thanked him quietly for standing up to the HOA. They wished things had been different. Others criticized him for closing the land and accused him of being vengeful. Eli understood their feelings but remained firm in his choice. The forest grew quieter. The trails became overgrown without regular visitors. The laughter and footsteps that once filled the woods faded. But Eli found peace. He spent more time walking the forest alone, learning its secrets and caring for its health. He planted new trees, cleaned up fallen branches, and watched the animals return to the quiet woods. Slowly, the forest became a sanctuary not just for Eli, but for the wild creatures that lived there. At home, Eli's friends and family saw a change in him. He seemed stronger, more peaceful, but also more serious. He was no longer just a quiet man who loved the woods. He was a protector, a guardian. One evening, Eli sat on his porch with his dog, Max. The sun was setting, painting the sky in warm orange and pink. Eli looked at the forest and smiled softly. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. The neighborhood might continue to resist. The HOA might try to find new ways to challenge him. But Eli was ready. He had taken back control of his life and the land he loved. He had made a stand for himself, for the forest, and for fairness. And in the quiet of the woods, Eli found his peace. When Eli Turner closed the forest trails and posted no trespassing signs, the news spread quickly through the small town. The woods had been a favorite place for many people, families, hikers, dog walkers, and photographers. Now, those familiar paths were silent and empty. At first, many neighbors were confused. They had not known about the dispute between Eli and the HOA. To them, the forest was a public place, a place to enjoy nature, to breathe fresh air, and to escape their busy lives. One morning, a group of neighbors gathered near the main trailhead. They looked at the new signs with surprise and frustration. "Why would Eli close the forest?" asked a young mother, holding her child's hand. "I don't know," said a man with a camera. "Those trails were my favorite place to walk." A few people tried to find Eli to ask him about it. But he kept mostly to himself, visiting the forest early in the morning or late in the afternoon, avoiding crowded places. One day, a woman named Sarah, who had lived in the town for years, decided to visit Eli. She was a kind and gentle person, known for her love of nature and for trying to understand both sides of every story. Sarah knocked on Eli's door. When he opened it, she smiled softly. "I hope I'm not bothering you," she said. "I wanted to talk about the forest." Eli invited her in. They sat on the porch, the warm sun shining down. Sarah spoke carefully. "The woods meant a lot to many people," she said. "We didn't know about your troubles with the HOA. We just miss the trails." Eli listened quietly. He told her what had happened: the fines, the meetings, the unfair treatment. He explained why he had to close the forest. Sarah nodded. "I'm sorry you went through that. No one should feel like they don't belong in their own home." For the first time in weeks, Eli felt someone truly understood him. Word spread about Sarah's visit, and slowly, other neighbors reached out to Eli. Some came with questions. Others came to apologize for not knowing the whole story. One afternoon, a small group of neighbors walked to Eli's cabin. They wanted to ask if there was a way to share the forest again, maybe with some rules to keep everyone safe and happy. Eli thought about their words. He wanted peace, but he also wanted to protect himself. He didn't want to face more unfair fines or suspicion. "I understand you love the forest," Eli said gently. "But right now, I need to keep it closed. I have to feel safe and respected." The neighbors nodded sadly but promised to wait and respect his decision. Despite the silence in the woods, Eli was not lonely. He found comfort in small moments: the songs of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the visits of deer at dawn. He also spent time improving the land. He cleared old trails that were overgrown and planted native flowers to help bees and butterflies. He built small birdhouses and watched as new families of birds made their homes. The forest became a quiet sanctuary, a place alive with nature's beauty, but closed to people for now. One weekend, a family tried to enter the forest with their dog. They saw the no trespassing signs and stopped. The father said to his children, "We have to respect the rules, even if we don't understand them." Eli watched from a distance. It hurt to see the empty trails and the disappointed faces. But he also knew that this was part of the healing process for himself and for the community. The neighborhood began to change slowly. Some families found new places to hike, while others missed the forest deeply. In town, conversations about Eli and the forest became quieter. People started to see him not as an outsider, but as someone who had stood up for himself in a hard situation. Eli continued to live simply and quietly. He worked at the local mechanic shop during the day and spent evenings walking the forest, caring for the land he now owned. Sometimes, he thought about the future. Maybe one day, the trails would open again. Maybe neighbors and Eli could find a way to share the woods peacefully. But for now, Eli was content with the quiet. He had taken control of his life and his land. He had found strength in standing up for what was right. And in the heart of the forest, Eli found a peace that no one could take away. Weeks passed since Eli Turner closed the forest trails. The woods remained quiet, wrapped in the gentle sounds of nature. Eli felt peace in the solitude, but he also knew something important was missing. One bright morning, Eli received a letter. It was from the HOA. The letter was polite but firm. They wanted to meet with him to talk about the forest and the community. Eli thought carefully. Should he meet them? After everything that had happened, could he trust the HOA to listen? He decided to go. Maybe this was a chance for a new start. The meeting took place in a small town hall. Eli arrived early, feeling nervous but hopeful. Around the table sat the HOA board members and a few neighbors. The HOA president began the meeting. Mr. Turner, thank you for coming. We want to find a way to work together. We know things have been difficult, but we want to listen. Eli looked at the faces around him. Some looked sincere. Others still seemed doubtful. He took a deep breath. I'm here because I want peace. I want to protect the forest, but I also want to be part of this community. The HOA president nodded. We understand your feelings. We want to offer a compromise. Maybe we can create rules for using the forest safely. Controlled access, limited hunting seasons, and community events to enjoy nature. Eli was surprised. This was the first time the HOA had spoken to him with respect and a desire to cooperate. He thought about the neighbors who had reached out before, about Sarah's kindness, and about the quiet strength of the forest. After a long discussion, Eli and the HOA agreed to work on a plan together. They would form a small committee made up of Eli, some HOA members, and neighbors who loved the woods. Their goal was to protect the land and find a way for everyone to enjoy it peacefully. Eli felt hope growing inside him. This was a new beginning. In the days that followed, the committee met regularly. They walked the forest trails, talking about which areas could be open for hiking and which should remain private for wildlife. Eli shared his knowledge about the animals and plants. The neighbors listened, learning how to respect the land and keep it safe. They agreed to limit hunting to certain seasons and areas, with clear rules to keep everyone safe. The forest would be open for community events like nature walks, bird watching, and educational programs for children. Slowly, trust began to grow. One Saturday, the committee organized the first community walk in the forest in many months. Families gathered at the trailhead, excited and curious. Eli stood quietly to the side, watching the smiles and laughter. Children pointed at birds and butterflies, and neighbors talked about the trees and flowers. For the first time in a long while, the forest was alive with joy and friendship. Eli's heart felt full. He realized that standing alone had taught him strength, but coming together with others brought healing. The forest was no longer just his land, it was part of the community's heart. As the seasons changed, so did the forest trails. They were cared for by volunteers, cleaned from litter, and marked with signs explaining how to protect nature. Eli continued to hunt, but always within the agreed rules. He taught young hunters about safety and respect. The neighbors learned to appreciate his care for the land. One evening, Eli sat on his porch with Sarah and a few friends. They talked about the journey, the hard times, the fights, and the hope they now shared. Eli smiled and said, "I never thought this would happen. That we could come together after everything." Sarah nodded. "Sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the strongest peace." Eli looked at the forest beyond his home. The trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. He felt thankful. Thankful for the forest, for the neighbors who listened, and for the chance to build something new. The journey had been long and difficult, but Eli knew it was only the beginning of a better future. A future where respect and kindness grew like the trees in the forest, strong and lasting. Months had passed since Eli Turner and the neighborhood reached their agreement. The forest, once silent and closed, was now alive again with gentle footsteps, laughter, and the quiet songs of birds. Eli stood at the edge of the forest one cool morning, watching families gather for a community nature walk. Children held hands with their parents, pointing at squirrels and colorful leaves. Hikers moved slowly along the paths, respectful and careful. It was hard to believe how much had changed. The journey had not been easy. The battle with the HOA, the fines, and the feeling of being an outsider had hurt Eli deeply. But through it all, he never gave up. Now, the forest was not only a place he loved, it was a place everyone could enjoy. Eli walked into the woods, feeling the soft earth beneath his boots. He breathed in the fresh, clean air, smelling pine and wild flowers. The peace he had fought for surrounded him. As he walked, Eli thought about the neighbors who had once been angry or confused. Some had even doubted him. But over time, they had come to understand. They saw how carefully Eli cared for the land. They listened when he explained the animals' needs. They respected his hunting only during safe seasons and his love for the forest. The community had grown stronger, closer, because of this shared respect. Eli smiled softly when he saw Sarah waiting by a small pond, holding a notebook. She was writing notes for the next nature program, a lesson for local children about the forest's history and wildlife. "Good morning, Eli," Sarah said warmly. "The kids are excited for the walk today." "Thank you, Sarah," Eli replied. "You helped make this happen." She shrugged. "We all did. It took time, but it was worth it." Eli nodded. "I never imagined I'd be working with the HOA or neighbors like this. But I'm glad we found a way." Sarah smiled. "Sometimes, when people listen, great things can grow." They stood quietly for a moment, watching a family of ducks swim in the pond. Later that day, Eli joined the community at the park for a small celebration. The HOA and neighbors had organized a picnic to thank everyone for their hard work and cooperation. Eli felt a deep sense of belonging. He was no longer the man isolated by fines and conflict. He was part of a community that valued fairness, kindness, and nature. At the picnic, Eli spoke briefly to the group. "This forest has been a home and a teacher for me," he said. "It taught me about patience, respect, and standing up for what is right. I'm thankful we can share it now, together." Applause filled the air. People smiled and shook Eli's hand. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Johnson, came up and said, "You showed us the meaning of courage, Eli. Thank you for not giving up." Eli felt tears prick his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. As the sun began to set, Eli walked home, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. The struggles were still part of his story, but now they were memories of a hard journey toward peace. At his porch, Max, his loyal dog, wagged his tail happily. Eli sat down, looking out at the forest's edge where the light faded into shadows. He thought about the future, the children who would grow up learning about the woods, the families who would explore the trails, and the animals that would live safely. Eli knew challenges would come again, but now he had the strength of a community beside him. The forest was more than trees and land. It was a symbol of hope, healing, and the power of respect. Eli smiled, feeling ready for whatever came next. Because he had fought not just for the forest but for peace. And peace had finally come home.